Yes, hello, folks. Welcome to the weekly Manchester United podcast. I'm your host, as always, Phil Brown, joined with my regular co-host, the excellent James Rhodes. It looks like you broke into somebody's house, Jamesy. It's not your usual location. What's going on there, mate?
This is my office at home. Yeah, I think we've almost every single time until now done the podcast with you from my work office. So this is my home office, nicely decorated. Yeah, different landing space for this usual podcast.
Has the wife seen you decorating yet? I'm guaranteed she goes in there. Those are coming down.
No, she helped. Fortunately, I had her. She put these up. So yeah, I got pre-approval so that I wouldn't be in too much trouble.
um, Lots to talk about today, mate. Of course, Brandon Buemo. We'll talk about his price. David Ornstein, Fabrizio Romano, both obviously, and others reporting that United have officially made their move. One of the things we'll talk about is Cunha, of course, and possibly getting the number 10 shirt. Tell you what I know on that. Dave Brailsford, of course, is having his role reduced. We'll talk about that. Jason Wilcox, of course, now the sporting director, and we'll talk about what that may mean. One or two other United related news. So, other than the fact you're working at home, how's everything else, mate? All good? You have a nice weekend or this week, all that?
Yeah. So far, so good through the week since Monday. Kind of ordinary in that respect. It's like we've talked about. It's United stuff. Too much happens for once a week to almost catch up with it. So it's good to get back together on a
Yeah,
midweek and do that.
we're twice a week now.
Yeah.
Thank you to all of you who subscribe, download the podcast. We'll start maybe next week opening the podcast up to questions and stuff. Maybe on the Thursday podcast, we'll dedicate a significant part of that podcast until the season starts. Because once the season starts, it'll start getting filled up. Although we don't have a lot of midweek games, so we will see. But as of next week, we'll start taking questions. If you haven't subscribed to the podcast, please do so on myself or James's platform. You can find the links to those particular platforms. And that's the best way you can support the pod. So we appreciate that. We'll start with Brandon Buemo. A lot has happened over the last 24 hours. United have made a move. The quoted estimated price 45 million plus 10 million in add-ons. Allegedly, Brentford wants somewhere around 70 million, which to me is an absurd price. I think the 45 plus 10 is a fair price, is a decent price. It's about what I would, if you would ask me what would I think and when was worth, I'd have priced them round about there. Um, what's your take on this? And do you have any other information, James?
Yeah, certainly. I think 70 is out of the range, and I think that realistically, I don't think they'll expect to get that. There's obviously a few factors in play with this, which is number one, that they've already acknowledged that they will have to sell him this summer. That the player wants the move to United, has made it very clear, only United, nobody else. So there's not going to be competitive bids because the player is not open to going anywhere else but United at this point in time, which is part of their strategy. The third thing, that he's in going into the final year of his contract. And one of the things that goes a little bit under the radar, that's a little kind of an unknown in a lot of contracts, is often how once a player gets into that final year, if you trigger that option and then you sell them, oftentimes there are financial penalties, or you might call them financial rewards for the player when they come into that option year for selling them. There's a real specific instance I know where, for instance, Fred, they triggered his option and then sold him, and he was due a portion of that fee. So there's a lot of factors working in United's favor on the negotiating kind of platform for this. But Brentford, of course, being a good solid Premier League club at this point, want to make sure they're not taking advantage of things like that in the market. But I think that in the end, they'll probably point to the Cunha fee. Has been reported as well that if they can get something close to what United pay for Cunha, 60 million, it'll probably get done around there. Um, Now, I think that 45 plus 10 is a good offer, but it kind of depends on what those add-ons are, right? Because the 10 can be, Mr. Woodward loved a good Ballon d'Or clause in there as part of those add-ons, and those might not be as they might look good on paper, but are not really ones that anybody would ever expect to pay out. So I think that it's a fine for a first offer, and I think they're continuing to discuss. I would imagine if the total price reaches 60, it'll get done, which is only 5 million more between them. But obviously, Brentford's side, they want those add-ons being a little bit better, a little more achievable. So if everybody goes up 5, then I think then they'll probably agree an outline and just discuss the nature of those add-ons. Is it negotiate? Is it 100 appearances or 50 appearances? Is it 50 goals or 40 goals? What gets those add-ons triggered? That's when they are getting down to, the details where a deal is likely to get done. But as far as I know, everybody's pretty optimistic about this on all sides that it'll come through. Sorry, I
Sorry, we'd
lost you.
heard the day that Cunha was announced, or right before he was announced, that there was some disagreement over the payment of the fee structure,
Right.
and then it just got eliminated. It just disappeared immediately. So
Yeah.
I expect that an initial open offer, you shouldn't get accepted, otherwise you've done something wrong. So you
Yeah.
expect your initial offer to be rejected and then come to some sort of agreement. I don't think there'll be any issue there. Look, James, Mbuemo and Cunha are two players that improve United immediately. They're not potential. They're not. Let's
Yep.
hope they can grow into, United players. They're two players that would walk into United's team that would improve them immediately. And look, that would probably be a significant or 99% of the budget gone
Yeah.
without player sales. But if you go to January, one of the things that we had said, if United can buy one player in January that would improve them the most, it would be a left back.
Mm.
United, if you had two players you needed to bring in at Manchester United and that's all you can afford, you bring in two attacking players. There are
Yep.
so many games last season, James, that United drew or lost just because they didn't score. Just they didn't
Yeah.
score the first goal. Everything else was fine. So, you start getting goals from Cunha and Buemo, the things significantly change. There's just so many games that I can think of at the top of my head where United missed gilt-edged chances that they should have taken, simple chances they should have taken, and then they draw or they lose 1-0 or, something stupid. And this is something that United will bring in other players, but to me, those are the first two you get done before you do anything else.
Completely agree, and I'm not to say that it's all done, but should both of these happen, one's obviously done and the other as expected, you do settle and say that alone, I think, with Bruno staying and we'll discuss that in a minute, in the situation that you have, that alone adds so much quality to the team that personally, I mean, there's no guarantees in football, but personally, you kind of relax a little bit and say, we can't have another season like we just had because we can't ever have that much lacking in quality in the front line ever again. It's just impossible. They were the two most productive wingers in the league behind Mo Salah. Is Mbeumo and Cunha. They were the two most productive. Now Saka was out with injury for a bit, but regardless, last season they're the two most productive wingers in the entire league behind Salah. So, that's something to be said. And in the top 10 total, just below a few strikers, some of the best strikers in the league. So that's really is something to be said. And I think you then look at that and say, all right, well, there's going to be goals in the team. We're never going to be in that situation where every week it's 0-0, 0-1 loss, 0-1 loss, 1-0, 1-1 draw, where we just cannot score and had again, the total in goals between the two of them was only 9 less than the entire United team scored all season. So that is a significant play and probably worth the bulk of your budget. Obviously, you need more, but it's definitely worth it.
Well, look, they're going to sell a couple of players.
Yeah.
They got some money from the Alvaro Fernandez deal. There's other players that obviously United will sell.
Yep.
That they'll get decent money for, that will fund other moves for other players. It just sort of delays now what you can do.
Yeah.
One of the things that we saw with Ineos, James, last season is they agreed deals everything was done. All they had to do was trigger it. And we saw things last season where they had to wait to sell players to do the
Yep.
Agarte deal. Everything was agreed, the
Yeah.
whole package deal, and then it was announced the next day.
Yep.
So I think that the deals that are contingent upon player sales will be done in the same way, where you're not starting as soon as you sell the player. Like, everything's
Right.
done before.
Yes.
So I think that that United will be proactive on that. The other question is, of course, without Liam Delap, what United still need, in my opinion, a number 9. Uh, Look at Arsenal going after Sesko, other clubs going after different players. It sort of leaves Yorkes. I mean, obviously, with Bruno not going to Al Hilal, they have a lot of money. Allegedly, they're throwing a lot at Victor Osimhen, so
Yeah.
it would put him financially out of United's reach. But
Mm-hmm.
Yorkes is one of the obvious alternatives.
Yeah, he's sort of falling into the vein of practically the only obvious
Mhm.
alternative if you're looking for a proven striker. Because once you step outside of the Premier League and you say, all right, well, these other targets, well, you're talking about young players for a lot of money, right? You're driving way up there. Ekitike, Sheshko, these guys are going to cost more than a Victor Gyökeres, and they're already being targeted. So certainly there's other people they've watched. There's guys like Samu Aghawa, used to be on Meridian, who also plays in Portugal, and really did a number on United when they played in the Europa League against them this season. But once you're driving up to the point where you're saying, hey, why don't we go spend 60, 70 million on a striker? Why go for the 21-year-old who scored half the goals that Gyökeres did in the same league? And you start to, it becomes rather obvious that he'd be the main name. Now maybe they would pull some name out of a hat, but I don't suspect that they want, number 9 is a difficult position. It is a difficult position. We know that it's probably the least I don't know, the least full position in all of Europe in terms of getting like really good number 9s, and so many of them have failed. But when you look at it, they bought this young kid, Enzo Canabiec from France, and are loaning
What's
him
his
out.
name?
They have what's that?
What's his name again? Sorry.
It's Enzo Cana. It's not like totally official yet, but Enzo Canabiec, right? I think it is.
Could
And
you
he
try it
came
again, sir?
You're gonna be messing with me. You knew what I said. But he's gonna get loaned out. You have Cheeto in the wings. You probably don't need another young striker is really not there. You want someone to like Mbumo, like Cunha to come in and produce. And it's pretty much falling to Victor Gyökeres as the main option there. And stylistically, you couldn't get really a better fit at this point in time.
Yeah, I still think that United will sign another striker, another number 9. It's very important, and there's some interest in Rasmus Højlund from Italy, very real interest.
Yeah.
So stuff could happen there. That would, I think, United, if they got a reasonable offer for Rasmus, would sell him. Um, some of that is, if things were different financially, maybe they'd be more patient with a loan. But if you get a decent offer for Højlund, it's hard to turn it down.
Mm-hmm.
Which brings us to the Bruno Fernandes thing, because I could sit here for an hour and steelman a case for selling him,
Mm-hmm.
and I could sit here for an hour and steelman a case for not selling him,
Yeah.
right? And so I understood those of the perspective that there's two things here. There's where we should be and where we are.
Yeah.
Reality is where we are. And we are in a position where we don't have the money to do the things we need to do. Bruno Fernandes, if you sell Bruno Fernandes and you do genuinely improve the squad with 2 or 3 players, that's a sound, smart deal.
Yeah.
What concerns me, James, is a bird in the hand is worth two in the bush. What we
Yeah.
have is that we know Bruno Fernandes is a top class player, and if you look at United stats without him last season, United would have been relegated without. Is if you look at the games they played, their points return total in those games, they would have been relegated without Bruno Fernandes. We know we have this world class player. What we don't know is whether United are going to use that money to sign 2 or 3 players that will improve the squad. That's an if, that's a potential, that's a maybe, this is a definite.
Yeah.
If I was confident that United would do that, and that they would strengthen, and that a lot of other things weren't. Bruno Fernandes has found a way to deal with the chaos at United.
Mhm.
He's always fit. He's an exceptional player, and to me, risking that on a couple of players that may or may not develop United, it's just, to me, like, I don't want to be sitting in September, October getting drilled, going, the players that we signed are being booed. Um, we can't fix this. Like, I just was never comfortable with saying, okay, let's sell him.
Yeah, understandable for sure. And like you said, I think you can make a case on both sides.
Mm-hmm.
I probably leaned towards I thought, I might end up better off
Mm-hmm.
if they sold him, but when he decided to stay, my immediate reaction is not, "Oh, crap, we're in trouble." It's, "Okay, fine. So we have
Sure.
Bruno. Cool.
Mm-hmm.
Okay." That's good. That's good to have him. Let's just get to work with the team together around him and build moving forward. And look, one way or another, everybody who's remaining at United has to play better next season, including Bruno.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody has to adjust how they play, right? A bit. They have to improve in certain aspects of their game that are maybe weak, where one could say, well, that's why it's going to be tough with Bruno. It looks to me like Bruno next season will be playing more permanently in that deeper role rather than playing as a forward, playing deeper in the midfield, which he did about half the time last season under Ruben Amorim. And to do that, it requires a bit of a different skill. It requires, he's going to have to be a little bit, calmer, maybe a little bit taking care of the ball a little more than he's used to while still being productive. But he can. And, I think he's the type of player that can do that. One of the games that really stood out to me, I was thinking about it, and I think this is why it was a game I felt was the best one of the whole season for United, despite it not being a win, that I've mentioned before, is Liverpool away at
Mm-hmm.
Anfield, the 2-2 draw. Because it wasn't just like the result or what have you. I remember, and I watched back some of a bit of that game of why it sticks out to me. And one of the biggest things that I noticed was, not only midfield wise were we working harder than them and seemed like it was a great game from Ugarte, and even Kobe Mainu was having a one of his better appearances because it was a tough season for him in a sense. But I remember specifically Bruno as well in that game. And he's had a few like this where he showed some things that I didn't honestly think he had, because there's things Bruno's really great at, and there's things I've always felt he's kind of a weakness. And one of them was in that game in particular, the way he carried the ball, the way he moved with it, where instead of just getting it immediately looking for the long pass or the big play, he was dribbling around the Liverpool midfielders, turning, carrying, winning those duels on the ground that you don't always expect to be a fundamental part of Bruno's game. But I've seen him improve upon that throughout the season. And I saw it yesterday. I watched him against Germany, and he was running them ragged with it in the second half for Portugal. So, I think that Bruno has really impressed me in that respect of his willingness to improve or change on some aspects of his game that maybe were not like his best. That will really help him to be in this. And then if he can do that, you'd be hard pressed to find a better player in the market, even if you had the money, or to find two better players in the market. So, everybody at the end of the day is going to have to live with that decision and just perform. I mean, that's the most important part of it, isn't it? Oop, lost you again.
God, I got to remember to turn them back up. Some of the things that are interesting is that some of the things that were said. Um, One, Bruno was saying United, if United had wanted to sell him, he would have. And they told him they didn't want to sell him.
Right.
And now that raises the next question: how does that affect United's transfer window? What does that mean that won't happen? That might have happened? Um, Now that and it appears that Amorim would have preferred to have Bruno Fernandes there
Yeah.
than one or two, couple of other younger players, whatever. Um, how does that affect how United go about their window?
Yeah, it's a good question. Well, we know that Cunha was before. We know that they started pursuing Mbumo, and it really like strongly before Bruno, they knew Bruno was staying. So we knew those were sort of irrespectively the top two things that they were going for with the money. And again, I think that the way that they think about their transfer plan rather than the old way of like
Mm,
Glazers telling Solskjaer, right? Like you get these three signings and that's it, is like we have a big plan. You know, if there's 10 signings we'd like to make, we know we're not getting them all done this summer, but we'll do as many as we can. Um, and I think that what it changes is like you say, the money, and the two next biggest priorities um, are a striker and another midfielder. Because in the midfield, certainly I think one of the dynamics that is a challenge is that if you wanted to play, Bruno in the midfield with for instance, like with Manuel Ugarte as a ball winning, younger, energetic player, where Casemiro is not obviously going to be here for a long time, even if he stays after the summer. He's still only 1 year left, and he's a different player than he was when he was younger in any respect. Then you're going to need midfielders, and I think that the next two things would have been that would be a striker, a midfielder. Beyond that, you might even want another midfielder, right? So that you have them, because, really when in a sense, um, you really only have right now Bruno and Ugarte, who are young and who played a lot last season, right? Because Toby Collier is sort of still a fringe player. Casemiro won't be here too long. Kobe Mainu still needs to kind of find his place. We don't even know, is he a midfielder? Is he a 10? Is he a forward under Amram? We're not really even sure yet. So in theory, you'd want to end up with two more midfielders. So I would guess I would suggest that all it changes is that, you know, the financially, I think it's going to be tough to spend to buy a big striker, a big midfielder. If Bruno were to be gone, you'd go get the striker, you'd have the money right away, and then you go buy another midfielder on top of that. Now you got to sell to get the striker, and then I think truthfully, you're really looking at the situation. Probably the two players that could leave that could free up some finances in the midfield are Casemiro and Collier, for totally different reasons, right? Casemiro because of big
mm.
wages, and Collier because if you get 10 million in profit for a homegrown player, then or a academy player, then it gives you a bit more spending there. So that's the main thing. Is it's just you need more outs to make that happen, right? You need to be sure of those things to make some space.
Yeah, and I think with United today, they're a lot more ruthless. I was watching when I was watching the Champions League final. I was looking at PSG, and they'd signed Goncalo Ramos and Rondo Colomwani, one for 95 million, one for 75 million. If they'd have been signed at United, mate, they'd have been foisted upon the next 3 or 4 managers,
Mm-hmm.
and there wouldn't have been any alternative signed.
Yep.
And you'd have had to have found a way to make it work. And then each of these players, 5, 6 years from now, would have been moved on for next. This is, so when we talk about United and Rasmus Højlund flopping or Anthony flopping, people forget, like Nicolas Pepe flopped at Arsenal and he was 70 something million, and Arteta had to move him on. With Ineos seem to be a lot more ruthless with that process, where 2 years you're gone. And if you don't live up to particular standards, the days of keeping these players 5, 6, 7 years and saying you have to make them work seem to be very encouragingly coming to an end. There is that obviously means that there'll be a number of players that United, I think, would be considering offers for. I think if they got a decent offer for Onana, I think they would take it. I think if you offered Ruben Amorim an unlimited checkbook, but could bring in whatever squad he wanted, I don't think Andre Onana would be in that squad.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And I don't think Casemiro would be in that squad. And I think there's a few players there that United would definitely be interested in moving off. They got decent offers. Uh, Onana is one that I feel is very, very important, James, going into next season, because you can have an exceptional defense, exceptional midfield, but even if you are exceptional forward line, if you have a goalkeeper that's doing what Onana's doing, I mean, unbelievable mistakes, with such regularity, it is completely deflating for your defense and for everyone else. And there were so many games last season where I was more worried about Onana than the opposition striker, in our own box. Uh, I think United, if they're not going to sell Onana, they have to get a number two in that is
Yeah.
capable of being number one.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. They have to. They have to get somebody who can at least compete and will very likely take over that position. And the biggest thing, like you say, is they need to, somebody with safe hands, somebody that gives confidence to the rest of the team, because it's not just the simple fact of giving up the goal, right? And making a mistake that costs you a goal. It's the knock-on effect it has that we've seen where players get scared to pass the ball back, and players get, they start acting differently. They start, they turn out and kick it out for a corner rather than in, and you get more pressure on you and things like that. So definitely a big one, definitely a big one. And I think that the biggest problem with moving on, as I mentioned, is again this point on these amortizations and values and things, because he's on fairly substantial wages and there's still a lot of money remaining. So it's gonna be somewhat hard to sell. But if not, then they definitely have to get somebody in for Bayindir, who can play.
All right, Dave Brailsford is having his role reduced. Anytime I've worked for a company, if you take an employee and demote them, it never works. They get demoralized, they get angry at the person that took the responsibility, took their job. They're angry at their whatever it is. I don't know whether this is something Dave Brailsford asked for himself. I don't know. But again, James, and I know I'm not putting the boot into any else at all here, but again, if you look at their vision last summer, Dan Ashworth is gone. You know, Brailsford, who was also considered one of the key components, is now, being pushed out or wanting to leave. Jason Wilcox is being promoted to director of football. You can get things wrong, trying to do things right. Okay, you
Yeah.
should expect that, but you should also be getting things right.
Mm-hmm.
Is it a concern that Dave Brailsford, he was considered, along with Ashworth, a key component of this team last summer, now being sidelined? Because I'm saying to myself, where's the positive? Where's the picks that are coming off? Because it seems to be that you're always trying to fix things that you inadvertently broke. And look, maybe this is the right thing. I don't know. I'm not putting the boot into any else. I just said 5 minutes ago that I am encouraged by the fact that they don't persevere with something that's broken. They
Yep.
they fix it right away. So there's a positive to that. But Brailsford going, what's your take on that?
I only take it pretty much as mostly a good thing. One of the things I think we talked about like 5-6 months ago, because we're talking about Ashworth, for example, is I mentioned to you at that time, and this is something I felt was a mistake, mind you, that they made. And it was one of the reasons Ashworth ended up departing. But it's in one of the articles there that confirms this too. Maybe it was from the Times when they put it out. And it says that, Brailsford's the one who picked Ashworth, right? And we had this discussion about it because we're like, it's kind of crazy, right? Like in the right setup, you pick your CEO and you want your CEO. Omar should be picking the sporting director, right? He should be picking the guy
Yeah.
underneath him. He should be involved in that. And they did that backwards at the time. And that was definitely a mistake. And so I think it's very telling when Wilcox is shifted up officially, because he's been doing it, but shifted up officially to the director of football role, essentially replacing Dan Ashworth, even though it's months later he's been doing it, but officially kind of replacing his job title. And he's the guy brought in and recommended by Omar Barada. So I take it as, okay, I think Omar's so far turning out to be a really good pick based on the things that he's been doing, because he's very clearly, from understanding his time at City, the guy driving these types of things about not persisting with players that don't make it, not going crazy on the wages and contracts, getting deals done very quickly instead of dragging out negotiations. Is his guy that he's like, that's the guy I want at the director. That's the guy I want involved in all these things. They've picked up Vivell, all that. So I kind of take it as, in an ideal world, Dave Brailsford would never have been involved. And it's really just the messiness of the whole takeover aspect in general that led to a lot of situations that, were less than ideal, I guess I would say, because they had the same situation at Nice originally, where when they came in, Brailsford was in there and he did a lot and did a lot and did a lot and did a lot. And then eventually they said, all right, let's get you out of here.
Mm.
Leave the structure to do now what it's supposed to. It's set up. And now, it's actually running quite well. They're qualifying for Champions League this season, or in the season just finished. They've actually done pretty decently and things are heading the right direction there. So I think to me, there's mistakes, there's these things too, but I think his stepping back is really just an indication that of less owner involvement, which in a sense I think is the right thing, right? Because in this way, this is where I don't want, Dave Brailsford is not a football guy. So there's the things that he could be there to advise on. How do we make sure that Carrington is set up for, best the best performance and physical things and all the stuff when they're redoing all of that kind of thing and overhauling the medical department. And I have a weird little sneaky thing about why players are suddenly
Well,
returning
they
a lot
also brought
quicker
in the
than
Formula
usual.
One guy. Yeah, yeah. Well, it's funny how many were fit for the Europa League final, but they also
Yeah.
brought in the Formula One guy. So I don't know if
Yes.
they delegated some of that
Right. And that's
responsibility
possible
from
too, the
Brailsford.
data aspect. Yeah. And so I just take it as he's stepping back because ideally he's not involved. He's similarly we had Blanc who terminated as a member of the team not that long ago to just go back to his role at Ineos Sport. But I think in an ideal world, Brailsford's not involved on an operational basis for United. And to me, all it really says is, okay, the team is in place, and we're going to leave them to it. And obviously, they're still going to maintain their oversight, and there's still the board and all of that that's involved in most things. But um, I think it's a good thing. I think it's a good thing. And I think it really just at the present moment, it happening along with Wilcox moving up and the hires of, like you said, the data guys, just says we have the team in place and we're not expecting so much more upheaval. And hopefully think there's now just some ordinary continuity with the people who should be there and less from the Ineos side.
Um, it's funny when United are going for players, they get quoted 2023 prices, but when they're selling, they have to choose 2025 pricing. Um, there's a number of players that will expect to leave. Of course, one of them is Marcus Rashford, along with a number of the other players. Cunha was alleged that he would be taking the number 10 shirts. Now, it's my understanding that there's been no communication from United and
Mm.
Marcus Rashford at all since the end of the season. None about his future, but this is where's your head at, what's going on. We might give your number to Cunha, blah blah blah. None of those conversations, from what I understand, have ever actually happened. Why are they not communicating?
Yeah, I have no idea. I mean, obviously, I can't say that I've confirmed myself anything with to do with the number and all of that because what have you. I mean, I think that Cunha will be officially unveiled in the jersey and all of that when then as they kind of usually do once the new one comes out, which is in a week from today, I think. And so we might find out then if he's got a number, or maybe it'll be the blank one because they do that very often as well. So I have no idea on that side of the story, but yeah, I don't know. I truly don't know. It's a strange one. I mean, I obviously I understand that in general when you're selling players, obviously the bulk of the responsibility for players who want to move or who are being sold comes from their side and their agents, finding offers and finding deals and bringing them to the club. However, obviously you would expect there to be um uh some regular kind of contact. I don't know. I really don't. It is strange to me
Yeah,
because I
that's
would
the
I would
fitness
certainly
stuff
expect there
here.
to be something.
That doesn't cost anything. You can get
Yeah.
people. The other thing is Mr. Sancho. Not a good look for Jadon Sancho when you desperately get out of Manchester United. You go to Chelsea, who allegedly was the club of your dreams, and they are paying Manchester United not to exercise the clause. That reflects really poorly on Jadon Sancho.
Yeah, it does. And to be clear, one thing about that clause is that I know there's been some question like why what is this? Like it's crazy, right? Now I think that the issue that comes with this is it's very unusual for an obligation to have the cancellation, but the problem is they never agreed a contract. And prior to moving, because it was done very, very late at the end of the season, and I guess they just didn't have time. You can't have an obligation without agreeing to contract with the
Yeah,
player
of
because you
course.
you can't buy the player without their approval. That's not how it works,
Well, yeah, because the player
unfortunately.
doesn't have an obligation, so
Yeah.
obligation
Yeah,
between
it's
yes,
not like the NBA or American sports where the contracts are owned by you're
the
essentially the
league.
contracts are owned by the league, and then they can get swapped around, and you're just buying the rights to the contracts. So it's very different in that respect. So that's why there's that clause because they had never agreed a contract in the beginning. No other reason for it, and really it comes down to it's such a weird thing because supposedly again Chelsea would be like his he grew up near there. It's his childhood club. It's this, it's that. He scores in a final. He's got a good end to the season with them. All he had to do is agree wages and couldn't get it done with them to stay. And it's like,
Who
what's
else is
wrong
paying
with
Jadon Sancho more than 200 grand a week? I don't get it. I mean,
nobody?
unless there's an offer
Nobody.
from Saudi Arabia or something, like I don't
Well, there might be
understand
an offer from
why.
Saudi, but yeah. But no, but that's the question. It's like, okay, are you giving up on your career for this? Are you saying that fine, I'll go to I'm not trying to insult Saudi, but what I'm saying is are
Yeah, of
you
course.
from the things you're saying, you wanted to make it in Europe, you wanted
Yeah.
to be at Champions League clubs, you wanted to do all of that, but you won't agree the wages that Chelsea want to pay you so you can come back and then what happens you're not getting those wages anywhere but Saudi. So you either leave all these aspirations behind, leave London, leave England. Apparently he was homesick when he was just in Germany. Well, how are you going to feel in Saudi? Like it's so weird. It's very, very odd behavior. I have no, whoever's with him and advising
Advising
him,
him, yeah, I just think the whole process is just, I don't see any upside to the things that he has done,
none.
the freedom thing, which
Yeah.
you know, and then you are comfortable not agreeing a contract with Chelsea, knowing that you're coming back to United. And again, yes, there's no disrespect to the Saudi league. Look, if an
Yeah.
Irish league team put in a bid for Jadon Sancho, I'm not going to sit here and say that the Irish Premier League title is equivalent to the best.
Yeah.
Well,
It's
it's
not the
just a
same
fact.
thing. Yeah.
It takes time to build
Yeah.
that prestige, and we make that appraisal all the time on
Yep.
other leagues. Um, so to me, I don't understand the strategy because you don't agree the contract with Chelsea. He only has a year plus one option on his United
Which
deal.
is obviously not going to be
He's not going to stay at
true.
Manchester United. He has no chance of staying at
Yeah.
Manchester United. Look, if I'm Sancho's people, I'm getting him out to Germany. He hasn't had one single good season in his career in
Mhm.
the Premier League. Go play at Dortmund or somewhere else. But James, Dortmund are spending 30 million on a championship player in Bellingham.
And they're not interested in Sancho
So
right
why
now.
are they not
Yeah.
willing to pay 25 million for Jadon Sancho? Like, I don't know. The young lad has exceptional talent. It just never materialized. And this is a warning for people like Alejandro Garnacho.
Mhm.
This next stage of your development is the hardest.
Yep.
And to get consistency in your game, you have to have consistency in your life. And that's hard, to be fair.
Yep.
And I think that this is the stage where tremendous young talents, most of them, don't realize their potential. Some will, but most won't. And he's in a situation now where, before he went to Chelsea, he needed Chelsea more than they needed him.
Yeah.
Now he's in a position where whatever club takes him, he'd have to consider going to, mid-table clubs. He will need them more than they need him. And so that's why I'm trying to understand who's paying him the wages that Chelsea were going to pay him. Like, I don't know.
Yeah, me neither. It's truly baffling because, it's not like he has many years left on his United deal at high wages.
Mm,
So, it's like you can get 200,000 a week from United guaranteed for one more season. I would say even 100,000 a week for 5 years is a way better deal. It's way better for you in that situation because you don't know what you're getting. You turn that down, which essentially has United need only about 15 million probably on him to break even on this deal. I guess with that extra 5 they got, maybe even a little bit less to just get it off the books and get rid of it. But I don't know. I don't know where you go. I don't. The problem he's got now is he went from Dortmund to United, Dortmund, United, Chelsea. No one's going to look at it and say the club's the problem anymore. You could have had doubt in the past that it was United's, that is just because of United, because we've seen it before, right? But the Chelsea thing is such a big red flag. I think he's going to find it really difficult to get anything decent in terms of offers. Maybe Saudi, Turkey, a league where they pay decent wages and will often take some players like this, might be the way to go. But yeah, it's a very, very baffling series of choices on his side. I really can't even like think with it at all.
Right, maybe we don't have a lot left. I want to say also before we go, Andy Ward, who is United's comms director, will be leaving football club. Someone that you and I have known quite well over the
Yep.
years. We've had certainly speaking from my own experience, I've had my ups and downs. We've had some disagreements, but we've also had a really good relationship. And I
Yeah.
wish Andy nothing but the best for whatever happens next. Someone that I will miss. Do you have anything to say here, Jamesy, before we go?
Yeah. Andy is he's a great guy. I've had many conversations with him, and he is a great guy who really does care about the football club
He
and
does.
also the way that it interacts with the fans, with us,
Mhm.
with everybody. And those are qualities you want in people, and he exemplifies that. So certainly will be missed, and I'll wish him the best in whatever he goes to
It's
next,
a
because I'm sure
really
he'll be
hard
good at
job,
it.
James. It's a really
Yeah,
hard job,
it
especially
is one of
with
the
the kind
toughest
of
jobs at
busy
the club, I
leadership.
think. Yeah, really is.
I think that has a big toll on you and your
Yeah.
family after a while. But yes,
Yeah.
Andy was exceptional. Wish him nothing but the best, whatever happens going forward. And we'll be back again on Monday with our usual podcast every Monday. And then, of course, Thursday with our follow up one. Anything before we go, mate?
That's it. Sounds good.
All right, James, all the best. Cheers, folks. Thank you very
Thank
much.
you.
Have a great weekend. Bye.